Treaty 1 territory, and the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We receive water from Shoal Lake on Treaty 3 land. We respect the treaties that were made on this land. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. We are all treaty people.
Thank you, Veronica, and to the drummers from St. Kateri Parish. Good afternoon to all of you. And I am Sister Denise Kipe, and on behalf of our community, I'm delighted to welcome you to this celebration, which was supposed to happen in April of 2020. Now, it's over 2 years later, and here we are finally to launch our history book titled The Sisters of Our Lady of the Missions, From Ultramontane Origins to a New Cosmology by Rosa Bruna Joffrey. We are especially pleased that Rosa could be with us today for this party. Welcome. And welcome to all of you, our friends, our family, co-workers, members of the clergy and religious communities, and to the entertainers you will see and hear this evening. So welcome to all, enjoy your time, and we are absolutely delighted you can be here. Thank you. And now I call on Veronica. She will say a little more about the book and introduce Rosa.
Indeed, I will. I'm going to say something first about how we came to have this book written. It was back in 2009, and the leadership team of Denise Kipe, Sandy Stewart, and Christina Cathro invited me to explore writing an updated history of the Canadian province of the Sisters of Our Lady of the Missions. So, of course, I formed a committee. 3 members of that committee are here tonight. Gilles Lesage, who was the director of the Centre du Patrimoine at that time, and who was very welcoming of our project and our request for access. Diane Fox, a longtime friend from Brandon, who also did interviews for the book, and Claire Hemble, a sister of Our Lady of the Missions, who's now living in Regina, who read chapters of the book and offered critique. Claire had previously been a provincial in Canada and the Superior General of the Sisters of Our Lady of the Missions, so she had an insight or two. 3 members of our committee were not able to be present tonight. Richard Lebrun was one. He was at the University of Manitoba History Department at that time, and now he's happily living at the West Coast in Vancouver. Merlin LeBlanc from Regina, who was very helpful to Rosa in doing the part of the book on Peru, but who broke her arm last week and so was not able to come. And another person who was on that original committee who was not able to be here is Sister Dora Tatro, the missionary oblate. Dora was really pivotal to our finding Rosa, and just her presence on the committee was very encouraging for us and eventually led us to ask Rosa to write the book. So, thanks to all of them. Now I want to say a word about Rosa. First, I will say some professional stuff about her, and then I'll say some personal stuff about her. So the professional stuff is, Rosa is an eminently qualified writer. She is a professor and former dean of the Faculty of Education, who was cross-appointed to the Department of History and Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Queen's University in Kingston. She's a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada in the Humanities Division. Her research has been and is funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. If you visit Rosa's profile at Queen's, you will see the large number of papers and book chapters she has published, as well as 11 books she has authored or co-authored. The lady likes to write. She received the 2004 Lamp of Learning Award in recognition of her contributions to public education in Ontario from the Ontario Secondary Teachers Federation. The 2010 Santander Group Distinguished Visiting Professor Award, the University of Madrid. The 2018 George Edward Clark Award from the Canadian Catholic Historical Association. The 2017 Toronto Dominion Bank Award as one of the top 10 most influential Hispanic Canadians. And the 2022 Distinguished Historian Award from the Triennial Conference on the History of Women Religious at the University of Notre Dame. In addition to her scholarly qualifications, Rosa also brings eminently human qualifications of warmth, humor, determination, creativity, and purpose to her writing and to her living. Rosa had to flee her native Argentina many years ago, and she lived in exile for a time in Peru, where she met the Chilean man who is now her husband. After coming to Canada, she came to Manitoba as Associate Dean of the Faculty of Education at the U of M. And it was there that she became aware of the dearth of materials about the contribution of women in education in Manitoba. And so she set out to unearth some of the facts about that. And as part of that research, she came in contact with the Missionary Oblate Sisters here in St. Boniface and became aware of the immense contribution that they made to education in the prairies. And so she wrote a history about them. And by the time we found out about Rosa, she had moved on to become Dean of Education at Queen's University in Kingston. After learning more about her background and previous work, on the recommendation of Sister Dora, our committee recommended we ask Rosa. And when Sister Dora recommended to Rosa that she take us on, the deal was sealed. So Rosa took us on, and she also took us on without a fee. She wanted to write this book as part of her own academic commitment to the history of women and education on the prairies. So this book is Rosa's history of the RNDMs. It is a book about us, but not by us. And because of Rosa's stature as an academic, she was able to get Sherpa grants, which enabled her to travel to our archives in England and Rome. So I got a much fuller sense of archival material. For me, reading this book, it was a unique experience to have the RNDM story told by someone who knew us primarily from archival material and from interviews. Rosa unearthed parts of that story that were new to me, and she described a trajectory of the province's life which was also revelatory and orients us toward the future. Following Rosa's brief presentation, there will be an opportunity for any comments or questions you may have about the book. For now, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Rosa Bruno Joffrey.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. I am very grateful that you are here, and this is a very unique celebration. In the first place, I am from Queen's University, situated in the Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee territory. We acknowledge this every moment when we are talking to public. I will not give you with a presentation with all the scholarly details because, well, it is an academic book, although I hope it is readable. But first, let me give thanks to Our Lady of the Missions, who were open to invite a secular historian. Of course, my book was supported, my research was supported by the SHARC, what is called the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. And thanks to that, I visited the 3 major archives in relation to the sisters. I was here in the Santa, got tremendous help. I was in Stirling and in Rome. The book is quite complex because it relates different kind of context, micro, macro, and so on, and the Vatican. It guides the reader through the journey taken by the Canadian province of this congregation, and it starts with the establishment in Manitoba in 1898 by invitation of the Archbishop of St. Boniface, Monsignor Langevin. And the book ends in 2008. Why? Because at that point, the congregation as a whole, at the international level, redefined its vision and mission and became the RNDM Earth Community. We are one, we are love. But the uniqueness about this is that this vision was framed within eco-spirituality and inserted in a new cosmology. And what I found fascinating in my research is how this province contributed to this approach. The book goes from the ultramontane dualistic theology the sisters had at the moment of foundation, very Bible-centric, beyond the mountains, meaning these ultramontanes beyond the mountains, very anti-modernist, anti-liberal, whatever was the position of the Vatican at the time. But they go through in the process, the sisters develop a tremendous identity as Canadians, to which I will refer in a moment. And then they move to social justice, of course, influenced by the Vatican, but in particular by the mission in Peru. And of course, they develop a tremendous sense of being women religious. And of course, the big epistemic break comes when they relate themselves to the earth as seeing the earth as part of the sacredness of all that is alive, then it as part of a cosmic story. Then it is interesting how the congregation was founded in 1861. Well, the congregation tried to convert and redeem people. Of course, it found out a space for itself in the colonial empire. And the center, this notion of salvation, the configuration of the other, etc., and it quite often conversing with the state agendas. However, in the field, the congregation actually worked a great deal with settlers. It's very interesting, it's very good to see how at the beginning Barbier developed her own religious self, her notion of being a religious woman, under the influence of a very rigorous Jansenism. The practice of self-sacrifice, acceptance of suffering in order to perfect her faith. This negation of the faith and leading to a very bureaucratic and authoritarian approach to the congregation. But at the same time, there was something different. She had been inspired by the Trinity, a Trinitarian inspiration, a charism, but still, as the sisters recognize today, it was not a radical spirit free, but it went from God to Christ to the church mediated, something that most of the congregations later revised. When the congregation came to Manitoba, they had been already in different places of the world. They had an incredible international network. And they came to Manitoba, they expanded to Ontario, to Quebec, to Saskatchewan, etc. Then we can say, historically, that they were able to secure their own place in the educational state. The educational state is still information. And in the case of Manitoba, you know the history. Then the RNDM were very briefly involved with residential schools, and this was a relief for me when I was writing. And for only a few months, they had difficulties with the direction on the part of the Oblate Fathers. I will not go in details, but at the same time, they didn't oppose the process of assimilation, the process of conversion. What I said in the book is silencing of the soul. Meanwhile, the sisters developed a very critical understanding of the world in spite of being semi-cloistered, and developed their own identity, working with the French Canadians, the European immigrants, English-speaking Catholics, and they have to work in the prairies, full of spontaneity, challenges to the rule, and that was the very, hard to say, attractive part. When I was reading documents, I read around 3,500 documents. This was the nicest, they were in the prairies, in a car, they fed, all these kind of things. Then the point here is that they related closely to their communities. And they took different kind of characteristics. And I like here to refer to Charles Taylor and his notion of social imaginary, ways in which people imagine their own existence, how they fit together, expectations, the normative actions, normative notions. When the sisters lived in those communities and were part of this, an interaction, even if it was semi-cloistered, then this was a particular element that I explored to some length. Of course, the 30s brought the challenges, but the main challenges came in the long 1960s. That usually we talk not of 1960s, but long 1960s, meaning we use Warwick definition from the end of the 50s around to the middle 70s. And then this was also the period after the war, and it's just the period of the Cold War is the period in which decolonization starts to happen, and we are talking of a transnational congregation that was very much part of that process. Then at the same time, the Vatican II, it of course generated a different configuration and had at its core the notion of the church engagement with the world and justice and so on. Then it was a completely different scenario. And then the RNDNs had to deal with tremendous challenges. There is schools for girls did not survive, for example, but the private, but there were a number of reasons. As you remember for sure, they were very hard with the French communities, having into account the notion of the French-Canadian notion, including Quebec and communities outside Quebec. We know in the 60s, there was a movement in Quebec away from the pursuit of a common identity for all French Canadians. We talk of sovereignty. Then, at the same time, through all this process, the sisters developed their own sense of being Canadian. And I remember reading, and it is in the book, a letter or a presentation by, I think it was Jane Roche, that she was telling in a very assertive way, we don't agree with this. We are Canadian. And she talked about our history, the Canadian history. Fascinating. At the same time, the sisters engaged in the mission in Peru. This was, they started actually in the field in 1969 as per the documentation. Well, the mission in Peru helped to re-signify the understanding of mission, transformed their sense of identity as missionary sisters, and they became familiar with liberation theology. And they would embrace, of course, fully in the late 60s, in the 70s, feminist theology. I don't like to say theology, I say theology. Okay, then the chapter on Peru, I lived in Peru for 2 years, was a good experience and a difficult one. I had difficulties to find all the information, but then somebody came to help me in the congregation, Marilyn LeBlanc, as Sister Dorothy Drop had done with the Missionary Oblate Sisters with the history. And her narratives, her sharing of photographs, memories, whatever she had, documents, was fundamental to write this chapter. Then, at the same time, becomes what is the most powerful element in the book, at least when I present in conferences, appears this way, is when the congregation as a whole embraced social justice. Most congregations did, after Vatican. The adoption of eco-spirituality represented the most powerful break. It's not that they moved from a very obedient anti-modernist position to a modern self, looking for autonomy, inviting psychologists to the carpets. No, now they had gone through the embrace of social justice, and from there, they at the same time they started to explore eco-spirituality. It's a powerful break, because they move beyond the boundaries of the modern self, the autonomy and so on, to resituate themselves in relation to the universe and the human and non-human world. The point here is that the province played an inspiring role for the international congregation in the late 1990s and 2000s. I don't go into that, it's detailed in the book, but the retreat of June 2003 was something special. There, the sisters, inspired by the work of Thomas Burley, Michael Dow, etc., they actually recognized the indigenous contribution to the questioning of cosmology, and they develop a different vision, being open to all religions, to the indigenous contribution, to science, and this is a fascinating retreat. I don't know if the sisters see that way, but they develop there the basis of what they actually move to the international congregation. I like a quotation from there that says, things happen in the world that even God cannot prevent. And thus, that is does not trust God or prevent crosses, but rather the role of God, they say, is to heal and resurrect. And of course, they talk about the sacredness of all forms of life. I like very much when they critique the Western cosmology and its ties to the economy, to politics, to the destruction of the environment, and so on. They critique the role of corporations and regulations, and so on. Then the critique of Western cosmology, discussing the retreat, showed how Western cosmology is closely intertwined with Western economics, law, and ethics. And I like something they said, that Western morality, they said, has been solely concerned with human behavior toward God and other human beings. The way humanity treats the earth has not been considered a moral issue. That's very, very beautiful. In the book, you have I will stop here, but you have the pamphlet, or handout they deliver, giving the features of earlier cosmology and of the Western cosmology they call earlier, and the emergent cosmology, and how they compare a very mechanistic model to a relational model. And these are actually also a critique to extreme neoliberalism that appeared in some places. I thank you very much. I welcome any questions, comments. Feel free. If you wish, I read the last paragraph with the conclusion, if it is not too long. I may have taken too much time. Is it okay? With my accented speech. You suffer a bit by now. Yeah. Well, it says, it's only a paragraph, a long paragraph. The history of the Arendians in Canada illustrates a congregation whose foundress was nourished by ultramontanism, papocentric view of the church, and influenced by Jansenism, in particular its moral rigorism that even led to forms of suffering to reach spiritual perfection. In the field, the sisters lived the unique experience of their missionary venture in the Canadian prairies, developed a Canadian identity, went through the crisis and renewal process of the law in 1960s, and underwent a transformative experience in Peru. The sisters in the Canadian province emerged with a vision of the self and their community that had a pioneering tone and reflected intense interaction with the international congregation, which was searching for its own identity. The renewed vision moved the congregation as a whole beyond modernism, while remaining constrained by the power structure of the Vatican. The Canadian province recognized itself as an Asian community, but experiencing Asia, it said, was something to celebrate through paying attention to the wholeness of the body, mind, and soul, not separable as in dualistic theology, and by cultivating nurturing sensibilities to restore holiness in the sisters. The sisters henceforth aim at a full reconstruction of the various dimensions of the self within an emerging cosmology grounded in interconnectedness, perceiving the Earth as part of a living planetary system. The matter of the habits that I discussed in the book earlier became part of their history. The important spiritual aspiration was to become witnesses. New vocations currently coming to the congregation as a whole are from Asian countries, and the Canadian province is receiving some of them to share its experiences and vision. Thank you. I would like to close by giving my thanks to the sisters, also to Sister Dora Tetro and the Oblates sisters. Thank you so much.